hope you had a very lovely half term in the sunshine. So we are back to looking at and inspect calls today. So we're going to start as always with looking at some old and new vocabulary. So the first word we're going to think about is prejudice. So in what ways were the other boys prejudiced against Piggy in The Lord of the Flies? You know, they treat him the way they do automatically the minute they look at him. So how is that an example of prejudice? And then last lesson we looked at the word spiteful. So how are Sheila's actions towards Eva Smith spiteful? And our new word today is gallant. Now, if someone's gallant, their behaviour is very brave or heroic. Now, typically, gallant is describing a man who is very charming and very attentive, very chivalrous. If you think of the word chivalry as like a knight in shining armour towards women. So gallant is often describing a man's behaviour, but that doesn't mean that a woman, of course, cannot behave gallantly as well. So, do you think Eva Smith's actions were gallant in standing up to Mr. Birling? Now, remember when she was employed as one of Mr. Birling's factory girls, she was part of a ringleader to do the strikes, and we are told she had far too much to say, so she had to go. So at some point, she obviously stood up to Mr. Birling. Do you think that behaviour was gallant? So you can pause the video and have a go at answering the 3 questions. So the boys were prejudiced against Piggy due to the fact that he was overweight. You know, he wasn't particularly attractive. He was overweight. He wore glasses, and he had this asthma. Although they didn't understand really what that meant, but all of these things set Piggy out as being different. And you know, one of the many ideas or concepts or themes that Golding wants us to think about in Lord of the Flies is the way that, you know, the destructive power of fear being the predominant or the main one, but also this fear of people who are different to us, and how often we can judge people and be prejudiced against people simply because of their gender or the colour of their skin or the fact that they are overweight or wear glasses. So we definitely see an example of prejudice there with how poor Piggy is treated. So remember, if you're spiteful, then your actions are very nasty and very unkind. So Sheila's actions against Eva Smith are spiteful because she was feeling bad about herself, and she very likely misinterpreted Eva Smith's smile and used her position to get her fired. And remember, this job for someone like Eva Smith was an incredibly amazing opportunity for someone in her position, and Sheila rips that away from her as if it was nothing. And it was nothing for Sheila, and that's, you know, another example of Sheila's ignorance. She would have no idea how amazing an opportunity that was for Eva Smith. She just saw a girl who was reasonably attractive and thought like she could take care of herself. And you know, what we see from this point onwards is Sheila really growing and Sheila really changing and becoming less ignorant as a result of the inspector's lessons. And remember, Sheila is our model, the audience's model. We are supposed to become less ignorant about the issues Priestley wants us to think about, along with Sheila. So, do you think Eva Smith's actions were gallant in standing up to Mr. Birling? Well, again, this happens off stage, so we don't know exactly what happens, but the idea of a working class girl actually standing up for herself to an upper middle class man like Mr. Birling is incredibly brave and gallant. So today we're going to focus on Gerald. So we're going to explain how Priestley uses language to develop our impression of Gerald. We're going to look specifically at how he uses language to do that. We're going to think about how this impression links to Priestley's beliefs and intentions in writing the novel. How does the presentation of Gerald's character link to this idea of educating us about socialism and showing us the dangers of capitalism and social class? And we're again going to look at the way Sheila and Gerald's relationship has continued to change. So, by the power of my magic computer. I'm now going to switch over to the play. We're going to listen to the next little bit.
At the end of January last year, Eva Smith had to leave Millwards because Miss Birling compelled them to discharge her. And then she stopped being Eva Smith and looking for a job and became Daisy Renton with other ideas.
Those other ideas are likely that she was forced to become a prostitute with no employment to be had. This was often a unfortunate choice that a lot of young women needed to make.
Mr. Croft, when did you get to know her?
What? Gerald?
Where did you get the idea that I did know her?
It's no use, Gerald.
You gave yourself away as soon as I mentioned the name Daisy Renton.
Of course he did.
All right. I met her first sometime in March last year in the Stalls Bar of the Palace. I mean the Palace Music Hall here in Brumley.
Well, we didn't think you meant Buckingham Palace.
Sheila, you've said your piece. You're obviously going to hate this, so why on earth don't you just leave us to it?
Nothing would induce me. I want to understand exactly what happens when a man says he's so busy at the works that he hardly has time to come and see the girl he's supposed to be in love with.
In the Stalls Bar at the Palace Variety Theatre.
I happened to look in one night, and as the show wasn't very bright, I went to the bar. It's a favourite haunt of women of the town.
Women of the town?
Women of the town are, again, prostitutes. So this music hall is a place where, you know, men can have a drink, see a show, pick up a prostitute. So it appears to be.
I think it would be much better if Sheila didn't listen to this story.
You're forgetting I'm supposed to be engaged to the hero of it. Go on, Gerald. You went into the bar, a favourite haunt of the women of the town.
Look here as well how Mrs. Birling doesn't like the idea of Sheila hearing about prostitutes. So they, again, are still patronising her and treating her like a child. And we can see why Sheila is so ignorant and doesn't understand what it would have been like for a girl like Eva Smith, because her parents have deliberately wanted to keep her sheltered and ignorant.
I'm glad I amused you.
Come along, Mr. Croft. What happened?
I didn't propose to stay long. But then I noticed this girl. My God. Sorry, I've suddenly realised, just taken it properly, that she's dead.
Go on, Mr. Croft.
She looked young and fresh and altogether out of place there. And obviously she wasn't enjoying herself. Old Joe Meggerty, half drunk and goggled-eyed, had wedged her into a corner with that obscene fat carcass.
There's no need to be disgusting. And surely you don't mean Alderman Meggerty?
Of course I do. He's a notorious womanizer, as well as being one of the worst sots in Brumley.
Well, really? Alderman Meggerty. I must say, we are learning something tonight.
Now, this seems like a sort of little throwaway narrative about Alderman Meggerty, but you know, an alderman would be someone of a high, you know, position in the sort of courts and legal system, and this idea that his reputation is one of, you know, a womanizer. Basically, he would regularly sexually assault women, is something Mrs. Birling is ignorant to, because Mrs. Birling thinks, well, he's an alderman, he's someone of a high status. If you're rich, you're automatically a good person. That's what Mrs. Birling believes, and therefore if you're poor, you're automatically a bad person. So when she says, oh, we really are learning something tonight, Priestley's using that statement really ironically, because of course Mrs. Birling isn't learning any of the right lessons. She may be becoming slightly less ignorant to some of the sort of ills of society, but what she's certainly doing is not picking up on any of the lessons of the inspector.
Well, go on, please, Mr. Croft.
The girl saw me looking at her and gave me a glance. It was nothing less than a cry for help. So I went across and told Meggerty that the manager had a message for him or something like that. Got him out of the way. And then told the girl she'd better let me take her out of there.
Where did you go?
To the county hotel, which I knew would be quiet at that time of night. All she wanted was to talk. A little friendliness.
She talked about herself?
Yes. She told me her name was Daisy Renton, that she'd lost both parents, that she came originally from somewhere outside Brumley. She also told me that she'd had a job in one of the works here and had had to leave after a strike. She said something about a shop too, but wouldn't say which it was. And she was deliberately vague about what happened. I couldn't get any exact details about her past life, but what she did let slip, though she didn't mean to, was that she was desperately hard up, and at that moment was actually hungry. I made the people of the county find her some food.
And then you decided to keep her as your mistress.
What?
Of course, Mother. It was obvious from the start.
I discovered she was going to be turned out of the miserable back room she had. A friend of mine had gone off to Canada for 6 months and given me the key to a set of rooms and asked me to keep an eye on them and use them if I wanted. So I insisted on Daisy moving into those rooms, and I made her take some money to keep her going there. I want you to understand, Inspector, that I didn't install her there so that I could make love to her. I made her go because I was sorry for her, and I didn't like the idea of her going back to the Palace Bar. I didn't ask for anything in return.
I see.
Yes, but why are you saying that to him? You ought to be saying it to me.
I suppose I ought, really. I'm sorry, Sheila. Somehow
I know. Somehow he makes you.
But she became your mistress?
I suppose it was inevitable. She was young and pretty and warm-hearted and intensely grateful. I became the most important person in her life.
Were you in love with her?
Oh, I really must protest.
Why should you protest? It was you who turned the girl out in the first place.
I only did what any employer might have done. And what I was going to say was that I protest against the way in which my daughter, a young, unmarried girl, is being dragged
And
into
it was
this whole
I
thing.
who had the girl turned out of her job at Millwoods. And I'm supposed to be engaged to Gerald. I'm not a child father.
Sheila beginning to stand up for herself. So think about the difference already that we see in Sheila compared to the Sheila at the start of the play. She says, I'm not a child. I'm responsible. I got her chucked out of her job at Millwoods, so you can't keep me out of this.
The right to know. Well, Gerald, were you in love with her?
It's hard to say. I didn't feel about her as she felt about me.
Of course not. You were the wonderful fairy prince who adored it.
All right, I did for a time. Nearly any man would have done.
That's probably about the best thing you've said tonight. At least it's honest. Did you go and see her every night?
No, I wasn't telling you a complete lie when I said I've been busy at the works. We were very busy. But of course I did see a good deal of her.
I don't think we want any further details of this disgusting affair.
I do.
It wasn't disgusting.
It's disgusting to me.
Yes, but after all, you didn't come into this, did you, Mother?
Inspector, is there anything else you want to know that you ought to know?
Yes. When did this affair end?
I can tell you exactly. In the first week of September, I had to go away for several weeks on business. By that time, Daisy knew it was coming to an end, so I broke it off definitely before I went.
How did she take it?
Better than I'd hoped. She was very gallant about it.
That was nice for you.
No, it wasn't. She told me she'd been happier than ever before, but that she knew it couldn't last, hadn't expected it to last. She didn't blame me at all. I wish to God she had now.
Now, this is really important. We see yet again that Eva Smith, or Daisy Renton, is a very pragmatic person. She would have known that whilst Gerald obviously did care for her, and you know, I think Priestley wants us to believe that Gerald was just helping her out, that it wasn't some sort of plot to get her to sleep with him, that he obviously did feel something for her, but it would have never been enough to marry her. You know, imagine the scandal of a man and an aristocrat like Gerald Croft marrying a girl like Eva Smith, and she's not silly enough or ignorant enough to think that their relationship would ever last. But this idea that she'd been happier than she ever had been before is one that we're going to revisit in a moment.
Perhaps I feel better about it.
She had to move out of those rooms.
Yes. She'd saved a little money during the summer. Didn't want to take any more from me. But I insisted on a parting gift of enough money to see her through to the end of the year.
Did she tell you what she proposed to do?
No. She refused to talk about that. I got the idea that she thought of leaving Brumley. Did she?
Yes. She went away to be alone, to be quiet, to remember all that had happened between you.
How do you know that?
Well, she kept a rough sort of diary. She felt there'd never be anything as good again for her. And she said she had to go away and remember, just to make it last longer.
Now, this is a really, really important line, because what Eva Smith or Daisy Renton did after her relationship with Gerald ended is she took herself away from Brumley to basically allow herself that time to remember their relationship, because she felt that she'll never be as happy or have something as good in her life again as that relationship with Gerald. Now, we need to remember that this is a woman who 6 months later kills herself. And whilst it's very difficult for us to psychologically get into the headspace of how she must have been feeling in that moment when she made that decision, this idea of knowing that she was never going to be as happy again, or never going to have something as good as her relationship with Gerald, I always feel is a really significant factor in her eventual suicide. So whilst in many ways Gerald was very kind to her, you know, he cared about her, he made sure she was okay, he rescued her from prostitution, he still gives her something really wonderful and takes it away again. So you could argue that whilst he had good intentions, what he was also doing was really, really cruel, because he gives her something, a taste of something she never would have had she not met him, and then he takes it away. And we see that she doesn't end up in a better position than she did when he rescued her from prostitution in the first place. So Gerald is a really fascinating character, and probably the most interesting character to write about in this play, because he doesn't fit into the neat categories of Mr. and Mrs. Birling being negative and Eric and Sheila being positive. He sort of floats somewhere in between. But we'll pick up on that a little bit more later on.
I see. Well, I never saw her again. And that's all I can tell you.
It's all I want to know from you.
In that case, well, I'd like to be alone for a little while. I'd be glad if you'd let me go.
Go where? Home?
No, I'll just go out, walk about for a while, if you don't mind. I'll come back.
All right, Mr. Croft.
Just in case you don't come back, Gerald, I think you'd better take your ring with you.
I see. Well, I was expecting this.
I don't dislike you as I did half an hour ago, Gerald. In fact, in some odd way, I rather respect you more than I've ever done before. I knew anyhow you were lying about those months last year when you hardly came near me. And now at least you've been honest. And I believe what you told us about the way you helped her at first, just out of pity. It was my fault, really, that she was so desperate when you first met her. But this has made a difference. You and I aren't the same people who sat down to dinner here. We'd have to start all over again, getting to know each other.
Now, Sheila, I'm not defending him, but you must understand that a lot of young men...
Don't interfere, please, Father. Gerald knows what I mean.
Yes, I know what you mean. But I'm coming back, if I may.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, so that is where we are going to stop it for today. So while I get the PowerPoint back up, we are just going to, or you are going to, just answer a few questions based on what we have learned today. Should appear any second, as if by magic. There we go. So, I'd just like you to answer these questions now. So what did Gerald do to Eva Smith? So what's their whole story about how they met? How did her relationship with Gerald affect her? So think about everything she wrote in her diary. How does he react to knowing she eventually committed suicide? So think about Gerald's emotional reaction that he tells us. And how do we see a change in his relationship with Sheila? Think about the last thing we heard about her giving him the ring back, saying that they'd have to, you know, they're not the same people who sat down to that dinner at the start of the play, how they'd have to get to know each other again. Okay, so pause the video now and have a go at answering those questions. So finally, we've got our final feedback. So do you think Gerald behaves gallantly in his treatment of Eva Smith? And what evidence do we have so far that the Birling family and Gerald are prejudiced against the lower classes? Okay, so finally, just to revise and recall that vocabulary and link it to what we've learned today, you can answer those questions, and I will see you tomorrow.